Fourth week of our sermon series, A Good Look at Jesus. Today we're going to be focusing in on his authority and what that means for us and in our walk with him. So our readings today are from Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 to 10. That's Jeremiah's call to being a prophet. Our continued reading from Corinthians will be in chapter 13, the love chapter, and then Luke 4, verses 31 to 44, the story right after what we finished last week. So we'll start with Jeremiah, and our first verse is verse 4. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Ah, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I'm only a child. But the Lord said to me, Do not say I am only a child. You must go to everyone I send to you to, and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, Now I have put my words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms, to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. Okay, so let's start with you guys, y'all. Anything in there that you're intrigued by or interested in or questions of?
Child.
Is he truly a child?
What is there with a youth? I would picture as maybe a teenager.
Yeah. Let me see.
Verse 6.
Yeah.
A child.
It's
I
a
would
reference.
picture as
He's young.
10.
He's referencing young. I'm
just
too young.
young.
Yeah, too young for this. We don't know how old he is.
Okay.
We do know that this is in the 13th year of the reign of King Josiah, and so we just don't know how old he is. But we know the time frame. It's probably around 600 BC.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, no, Josiah dies in 609, so it's probably about 610 to 615 BC, somewhere in there. So, but we don't know how old he is. But he's young. He's just referencing his inexperience.
Yeah.
Inexperience. Yeah.
It almost seems like the word of the Lord came to me, but verse 9 is like the Lord put out his hand, touched my mouth, almost like a dream.
Oh,
So
yeah.
visualize, he said.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be a dream. It doesn't say that it's a dream.
I know.
So you know my stance is, you've heard me say this before, when it says the word of the Lord came to me and saying, and then the fact that the Lord reaches out and touches, that I believe this is Jesus in some human form before he becomes incarnate. The technical term is the pre-incarnate Jesus, that he is showing up. Yeah, which we've seen him do that before, right? The messenger of the Lord is that same.
Oh, the messenger of the Lord.
That messenger, that angel
Jesus.
of the Lord, that's Jesus.
Yeah.
And coming in some form of a human being, right? The fact that he could reach out his hand seems to imply that there's a hand, a body, yeah, right?
So it'd be nice if the Lord could do that to me sometimes.
Like this to shut your mouth?
Yeah, here.
Well,
And
yes.
he probably does.
Sometimes he uses other people in our lives to do that, doesn't he? Yeah. Yeah. Or our conscience, right? Our conscience is driven by the Spirit, which is sometimes that.
Or sometimes, I find myself in an awkward situation and I'll just say, oh, please, Lord, give me the words.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's God empowering us with the words, but there's also what Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, one of the great gifts that we can give is the ministry of silence. Knowing when not to say something too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we kind of went through that with what do you say when someone dies?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you're better off
Just your presence.
Just being there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And ministry of silence sometimes is, rather than making the comment that you feel like you're obligated to make, maybe you ought not to make that comment. Well, that's part of it too. All right, anybody else? Any other thoughts about what's going on here in this text before I point out a few things?
Well, just the fact that, you know, the Lord is gonna be there for Jeremiah.
Yeah.
He is young and inexperienced, but
That's the promise, isn't it? In verse 8, do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will rescue you, declares the Lord. And God will promise that he'll be that strong bronze rock for him. Now, the thing is, Jeremiah will find himself in a lot of bad situations. And when he does, guess what Jeremiah does? He complains. He weeps. He's known as the weeping prophet. Yeah.
Often complains to God.
He does. He
I wrote that down.
brings his laments and his
Verse 8.
complaints to God. He does. Yeah. He is the weeping prophet. And he brings those laments to God. And God's okay with it, except for the time when Jeremiah says, God, you're like a one of those wadis, the dried up brooks that fill their landscape. Flows with water when it's a rainy season, but when it's not, it's dry, right? It goes, God, you're like that. You're empty. Your promises were empty to me. And God says, I get that you're hurting, but that one you're going to repent for. That one you need to repent of. That it's not that God can't take it, right? That we can't bring those laments to God, but at some point you realize that you just accused God of not fulfilling his promise.
Not carrying it.
Yeah. And God says, you don't get the whole big picture, Jeremiah. I do. Trust me.
I still, I'll focus on your sermon last Sunday when you had the picture of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're used to picturing him as
European.
He could have been, according to the ethnicity of the area, could have looked like that,
Right.
Which changes the whole picture to me.
Okay. Yeah. That our artists render him as looking rather European, Jesus.
Yeah.
The reality is, as a first century Israelite, he didn't. The one picture that I showed was basically the History Channel or Discovery Channel, one of those groups. They hired a forensic scientist to go back and look at the bone culture, the bone studies, the facial features of people in that geographic region, and then back from that time frame. And they came up with that visual interpretation. That's what he would have looked like. A very olive-skinned, short hair, curly tight hair, not a big one, flowing beard, probably more, tightly.
Right.
Yeah.
and apparently, it doesn't say in Isaiah, he wasn't really good looking either.
Well, the only,
Handsome.
it was because of the suffering, that he was marred beyond appearance.
Oh.
Yeah, Isaiah was focusing in on the suffering that happened to him. He wasn't talking about, attractiveness or not. He was so marred by the suffering, he was beyond appearance, and people turned their faces from him. Yeah. That's the only physical description you ever have of Jesus, is what Isaiah prophetically sees. But he's seeing the suffering that the servant's going to go through. Yeah. That Jesus will ultimately be that servant who goes through.
Verse 5 is kind of interesting too. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you.
Yeah.
And he had already, he knew what he wanted him to do in his life.
Yeah. What do you make out of that, John?
Well, I don't want to say it, but I wonder if that's for everyone. I know they always talk about predestined, they always can't say that. But I wonder if we're all.
That God has
He knew
that.
us all before we were born.
Yeah.
What we're gonna do.
See,
A lot of people to sort out.
it does. So, here's the thing. The sovereignty of God, right? God is all-knowing. So yeah, he knows, right? He knows what we are going to be. He knows he knows the end of the story. Doesn't mean that he causes it. But here, this is direct, right? I did set you apart for this. Yeah. You have that specific call in your life because I placed you. So, but we don't know if is that true for all of us? No, can't really say that, right? We do know that whatever is in our lives that happens, God can always take it and make it work for the good. You know the story of Joseph. That's the whole story of Joseph and his being sold into slavery. You planned it for evil, Joseph said, but what did God do? God turned it for good, for the saving of many people, which is, you know, the saving of the famine. I've used this story in my own life. When I was 2, my mom divorced. Never a good thing, never a godly thing, but a thing that happened. Her husband, my biological father, was an abuser and a cheater and left. And so the marriage ended. But out of it, God worked something good because my mom remarried and my dad adopted us, and he was a Lutheran, and my mom was Catholic before that, and not really practicing Catholic after the divorce so much because of all the guilt that gets put upon that in the 1960s Roman Catholic Church. And yeah, I probably wouldn't be a priest. So God got a Lutheran pastor out of that gig, you know, and so out of something bad, God can always make something good happen. Yeah. But yeah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you to be prophet of the nations. A lot of the times, this is also a strong indication of what we would consider our pro-life understanding, right? That life begins in the womb, right? That this is, you know, God saying, I know you. I know you. I set you apart. I formed you. I put you together. He says that too again in Psalm 139, where God says, I knew everything about you while you were in the womb. You are fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yeah. Isn't that kind of a clue? The soul is so much separate from the body. He knew your soul, I mean, that you were put into this body.
Well, it's a body in the womb. It's a body. I won't see. Here's
before I formed you in the womb, I knew you.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Well, again, this is God's sovereignty.
His domain, yeah. We don't.
Right. But I don't want to ever give the impression that we're a soul and not really a body, because when God created Adam and Eve, He formed man from the dust, right? And then He breathed into him the breath of life, the soul, and then He says that's good. And so God's image of what's good for humanity is a body and soul as one. When a soul and a body are divided, that's death. And God doesn't say that's good. He only wants us to be embodied people, souls and bodies together. That's the goodness. That's the creation that God made. That's what He always says is good. So we can never negate that by saying, well, there's the soul and then there's the body. But I get what you're saying, John. Before he's even born, yeah, God knows him. Before he's even conceived, God knows of him. But the part of it, right, is the fact is what God is saying, I set you apart for a special work. You got a purpose here. You're going to be a prophet, right? And what do prophets do? They speak forth for God. I'm going to appoint you to be a prophet to the nations, and you're going to speak forth. I'm going to put my words in your mouth, verse 9, right? Touching his mouth. I'm going to put my words in your mouth, so that when Jeremiah is speaking, it's not just Jeremiah speaking, it's thus says the Lord, right? Thus says the Lord. And then he's going to be the one who is going to, verse 10, his job description. You're going to uproot and tear down, destroy and overthrow, build and plant. In good Lutheran terms, we call that the preaching. He's going to preach the law and the law. I'm going to tear down and uproot. I'm going to overthrow and destroy the words, but I'm also going to build and plant. Jeremiah will do both. He'll condemn. He'll bring judgment, especially on the temple and all those involved with the temple and the leaders of his land. But he'll also make the promises. He'll build and plant. That God's going to restore them. He's going to send them a branch of David that's never going to fail. Right? Always prophetically pointing it towards Jesus. A shepherd who would shepherd people after God's own heart. All right. Anything else in Jeremiah? The interesting thing about the book of Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, he's kind of the only prophet that you get a feel of his character, right? Because he is, in the book, in the writings, he is coming before God in 4 or 5 different situations, lamenting, complaining, and having to go through all that. And you get the real struggle that he had, right? Some of the other prophets, you don't necessarily get that personal character development that you do from Jeremiah.
Well, it kind of says in the introduction, he's a weeping prophet because of his sorrow over the persistent message of God's judgment. He had to give some bad news.
He had to give some bad news, and people did not want to hear it. Yeah, he is that prophet that people don't want to listen to. That's why they throw him into a pit and leave him to die. That's why he's complaining to God, because nobody's listening. And in fact, they're not just not listening; they're physically opposing him, right? and persecuting him. But God did say, "I'll be with you, and I will rescue you." And guess what God did? He was with them, and he rescued him. Yeah. And Jeremiah is the one he's going to be the prophet who's going to warn about the impending judgment from Babylonians, and then he's going to live through it. He's going to have to be a witness to it. And he that's why he writes the book of Lamentations. The book of Lamentations, the 4 chapters of it, are all about the destruction of Jerusalem and how he had to live through it, and writes his laments about it.
At that time period, usually the destruction of a city with the walls.
It's right after
usually
Jeremiah
a siege.
Lamentations. What's that?
There's usually a siege ahead of time where they try to starve them out.
There was, yeah.
So it's not a pleasant thing for the people inside.
It is not. The sieges were brutal. Yep. And that's how Jerusalem got defeated by the Romans, was the siege then in 70 AD as well. And that's why Jesus, he laments, right? When Jesus comes to Jerusalem on the donkey, he's crying because he sees prophetically that they're going to keep on with this resistance and revolution pathway, and he knows prophetically what that's going to mean. And so he says, women, you shouldn't cry for me, but cry for yourselves, because you're gonna beg for the mountains to fall on you and end you because of what's going to happen in the siege, and it did. Yeah, and it was brutal. So Lamentations is the very next book right after Jeremiah, if that's what you were looking for. Yeah, it's right after Jeremiah. In the Hebrew Bible, it is. In our English Bibles, it's right after Jeremiah.
Did Jeremiah write Jeremiah?
Well, what a great question. Yes and no. So he's the one prophet that we know how to scribe. His name is Baruch. It's somewhere in chapter 36, I think.
Yeah.
What does it say, John?
To a scribe named Baruch.
Yeah, he's got a scribe named Baruch, who is the writer of the things for him. So if you go to chapter 36, I took a class on Jeremiah, teaching and preaching it for my doctoral stuff a few years back, and the professor who was teaching it was in the midst of writing a book called Overcoming Life's Disasters, or Surviving Life's Disasters, based on the book of Jeremiah. That was pretty cool, taking the class while he was writing the book. So I got a lot of stuff, and we'll eventually do a sermon series. It'll be a long one on Jeremiah. We won't do everything
You have a lot
Jeremiah.
of things on the back burner.
I do. I got a few more years to go.
I know, but
It's in the
you
plans.
frequently say,
We will.
that's what we're gonna do.
We will. I got it sketched out. I don't want to do it for admin for the next 6 years.
Oh my goodness.
I don't have the sermons done, but I know what it's going to
What's
be,
wrong with
the
you?
theme. Yeah. And Lent. So those are the 2 seasons. So, but we got Jeremiah too. So let's take a look at Jeremiah 36. In the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Take a scroll and write on it all these words I have spoken to you concerning Israel, Judah, and all the nations from the time I began speaking to you in the reign of Josiah until now. Perhaps when the people of Judah hear about every disaster I plan to inflict on them, each will turn from his wicked way, then I will forgive their wickedness and their sin. And so this is the first time that we know for sure a prophet has been commanded by God to write, to put down on print, right? The oracles and the preaching that you're doing. And then at the very next verse, so Jeremiah called Baruch, son of Nehariah, and while Jeremiah dictated all the words that the Lord had spoken to him, Baruch wrote them on the scroll. So the actual writer is probably, of all the words, is probably Baruch, the speaker of them, and the narrator of it all is Jeremiah. But that's the only one that we know follow that pattern, because it tells us right there in the story, in the book. We don't know that for Isaiah or Ezekiel, if they had scribes or did they write it themselves. But.
So the next verse says, Jeremiah is restricted and cannot go to the Lord's temple. So Baruch had a goal, and he had more.
Well, the kings didn't want this crazy prophet near the temple because he kept speaking against it.
But they accepted Baruch.
Baruch they would let go, evidently, yeah.
Okay.
Because Jeremiah in chapter 7 condemned the temple. This is a den of robbers. And this whole temple system is corrupt, and God's going to put it to an end. And God did.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it came back the second time, it got corrupt again. And what did Jesus say? The very same things. And put an end to it. And God did. Yeah. Alrighty. Good question. Anybody else on Jeremiah? All right, let's mosey over to the Corinthians. So this is our third week in 1 Corinthians, chapter 12 and 13. And the beginning of chapter 12 all start about spiritual gifts. I don't want you to be ignorant or uninformed. And so he talked about how there's a diversity of gifts, but the diversity of the gifts all have the same source, the Spirit, right? Same Lord, same God, same Spirit gives all this diversity of all these gifts. And then last week, taking the diversity, now applying it to the image of the body of Christ, right? So the human body has lots of different body parts, lots of different members, and they're all different, but they are all got the same creator, and they all form together to make the unity of one body. So Paul says, so you are now the body of Christ. A lot of different members, a lot of different body parts to the church, but it's all got one same source, and that's the Spirit in Jesus. And you guys are bickering about who's got the better gifts. That's what they've been bickering about. Who's got better gifts and who's better at more important in the church. Paul's kind of saying, y'all got the question wrong. It ain't about who's got better gifts. It ain't about who's more important, because you haven't sought out the greatest gift yet. And that's what he's going to tell us is in chapter 13. And so we're going to read chapter 12, verse 31b, which is the second part of the verse. And now I will show you the most excellent way. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but I have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy, and I can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but I have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, surrender my body to the flames, but I have not love, I gain nothing. So what's the word love here, by the way? He had four words he could choose from in Greek.
I would say care for your fellow man.
Okay.
And this is,
Yeah, this is the word that is agape, and it's always used to describe God's love. It's unconditional. Sometimes the King James interpreted it and translated it as charity. I have not charity, right? I have not charity. Unconditional, no strings attached love. And it's always used to describe God's love, agape. Now, the other kind of words he could have chosen was phileo, which is kindness. Sometimes that's used to describe God's love for us. Kindness, phileo. But didn't use that. He didn't use eros, which is passionate, attractive, sexual love. And he didn't use storge, which is familial love, right? Rough and tumble kind of love, where, you know, I could tease my sister, but you better not tease my sister, because that's my sister. And that word, by the way,
What was that word?
storge. And it's never used in the Bible. But those were the 4 Greek words. About 3 or 4 years ago, maybe about 4 years ago, an insurance company had a commercial at Super Bowl, on Super Bowl Sunday, about the 4 Greek words for love. Yeah, and I've used it. I got it clipped, and I use it in some of my study stuff, which is kind of interesting because, you know, their thing was there's the kind of love that goes the extra mile, and that's agape love, right? They didn't characterize it as God's love, but it's the extra mile, unconditional love, where you care for other people, expecting nothing in return. So that's what Paul's talking about here. If you have any kinds of these gifts, but if you don't have the most excellent gift, which is agape, you're nothing. You're nothing. Now he keeps on going. Verse 4. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put my childish ways behind me. Now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And so now these 3 remain. There's faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.
How often have you used those in the wedding?
Not often.
Really, you don't?
Most couples don't choose it.
No,
Yeah.
not today, but when I was growing up.
That's a pretty common one.
Yeah, it was pretty common. Yeah.
Yep. And so here's the thing. When we talk about love at weddings, we're usually thinking of romantic love, right?
Yeah.
Which is not
What's
1 second of that is here, right?
Right.
There is the word for romantic love. It's not this word, right? This word means, I'll wash your feet and expect nothing in return. I will serve you. It's a serving. I often interpret it or translate it as serving love. Yeah. That we can give serving love, which is that image of washing people's feet. That's this love.
Which could be useful. I mean, both my girls had this for their wedding. And I, you know, it isn't I know it's the agape. And it seems like it's impossible to do in a marriage or in a life to be that.
Right. We'll fail.
Yeah.
But God doesn't.
That God does it, and that makes it this much clearer because this is God.
And he empowers us to do that. That is the new commandment of the covenant, right? Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And it was nothing to do with feelings, right? It only had to do with actions. How did Jesus show his love to the disciples? He washed their feet. And then, no greater love as a man than this, that he what? Laid down his life for his friends. Yeah, so he goes and he gives away his life. That's the thing. So when Paul says, husbands, love your wives, he's not talking about, buy her 2 boxes of chocolate and some flowers.
It's Valentine's Day.
Right? Or he's talking about, how did Christ love the church? Love your wives as Christ loved the church. He died for her. Oh, that's how you're to love your wife, then. You should die for her. Deny her. Deny yourself for her. Right? She becomes more important than you.
You think when Paul was writing to the church body, his church,
Mm-hmm.
you think it was that bad, or is he going?
It was that bad.
Going into for everybody.
It was that bad.
Oh,
And this is for us as well. But yeah, it was that bad. That's why he's writing to a bunch of bickering little baby Christians who are more concerned about who's more important, who gets their ways, who's got the better gifts, who, I'm the guy who teaches. All you do is clean up the tables afterwards. I'm obviously a better Christian than you. That's the kind of people he's dealing with here. Yeah. And so he's got to teach them the more excellent way. If you got all these gifts, but you don't care about others and serve others, you're nothing. What good are you? You're nothing but a noisy gong, a clanging cymbal. You're nothing. No. And then the whole bit about what love is. Patient, kind, doesn't envy, doesn't boast, doesn't count the record of wrongs, not easily angered, doesn't delight in evil, rejoices at the truth. That's what love is. And then he gets into the bit about, the greatest of these, there's faith, there's hope, and love, these 3 virtues. Why is love the greatest then?
Because he laid down his life.
Okay, that's true. Okay. But think of those 3 virtues and look at the context right before it. Now I know in part, then what? Things will be made perfect. I'll know perfectly. So what is the now and what is the then?
Now is
Right now. And what is the then?
when we got it.
Well, we got
Yeah, when we appear before the Lord, when we're with the Lord.
And
So-
we understand everything.
Yeah, we'll understand. We'll know all things. All things will be. Now it's just like looking in a mirror. It's a reflection. But then it's going to be perfect. And we'll know. We'll have everything understood. So in the then, when we're before the Lord, will we need faith anymore? No faith. You
no faith.
don't need to have faith in heaven with the Lord.
Well, you wouldn't be there if you didn't have it.
Well, right, but when you're there, why don't you need faith? Faith is believing in what you
Don't know.
Oh.
don't know and
see.
cannot see.
Oh, okay.
That's faith, right? So there's nothing more to know, and you're seeing it face to face. And what is hope?
You're hoping to see it.
The expectation of the things that are to come.
Yeah.
Is there anything more to come? Not when you're before the Lord and with the Lord.
No.
Yeah. So love will be the only thing that's eternal of the 3. Because there you will still keep on loving. And there it'll be perfect. We will love each other again perfectly. Because we'll serve each other perfectly. That. So the greatest of these is love. Because in paradise, you don't need faith or hope. Unless you're named Hope, then you need her. Yeah. Or faith.
We're gonna have our names in paradise? Maybe.
Maybe you get to pick your own, I don't know. I would think so, because when Jesus is on the mountain, and who's talking with him? Not 2 unnamed people, but
Well,
Moses and
that all.
Elijah. Yeah, on the Transfiguration Mountain. Yeah, they're named, and they're called who they are. Moses and Elijah.
We'll probably be able to pronounce the names too.
Yeah, some of the names that are, yeah.
Ended up right in the first verse of 13. It says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I'm always intrigued by the hints and stuff. But angels speaking, they have their own.
I'm
They're
sure.
talking, but other angels will know what they're saying.
Yeah, I'm just going to read the note that my
Oh, okay.
I don't know a lot about that, John. Here's what the footnote says, talking about that verse. It says, Paul uses hyperbole, right? He exaggerates. Even if he could speak not only the various languages that human beings speak, but even the languages used by angels. If he didn't speak it in love, then it would be just a noise. So he's kind of doing a hyperbole here. What is the language of angels? We don't know. Yeah. Because every time they appear, they use human speech. Maybe they have their own speech too. I don't know. But whenever they appear to people, they speak in that person's language. All right. Anybody else about this 1 Corinthians passage? So Paul's kind of taken us in 2 chapters, right? About these spiritual gifts. Don't want you to be uninformed. The greatest gift the Spirit gives is faith, that you can confess Jesus as Lord. But these other gifts, the diversity of them is great. It's for the good of the body. And they all come from the same Spirit. So God's going to use those gifts to bring unity, to be one body. Though we're many body parts, right? Our human bodies. Same way with the church. The church has got a lot of different members, a lot of different body parts. And all of them are essential, right? And they're all needed. But if you're going to strive after these gifts, strive after the most important gift: love, service, and serving love for the sake of others. All right. So we'll be back at it next week with we'll keep going in chapter 14 next week.
It's interesting that this is follows the portals of prayer.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. I had to read about the text from Sunday. You know, we had it Wednesday, then we had it Sunday, and then Monday. It was the same thing. And my eyes were kind of blurry, and I thought, oh, I've seen this several times. Oh.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and yesterday was chapter 13.
Okay. Very good. All right. Well, let's mosey over to the gospel then. Luke chapter 4. So last week we finished up with verse 30 where Jesus, the scene of him in his hometown synagogue and how they're ready to kill him. Well, they don't. He walks on through the crowd and goes on his way. And his way would lead him to Capernaum. And our reading is 31 through 44. We're going to be focusing, though, on Sunday through verse 37. But we'll read the whole thing anyway. Okay? Now, they went down to Capernaum, a town in Galilee, on the Sabbath. And on the Sabbath, began to teach the people. They were amazed at his teaching because his message had authority. In the synagogue there was a man possessed by a demon, an evil spirit. He cried out at the top of his voice, "Ha! What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." Then the demon threw the man down before him and before them all, and came out without injuring him. All the people were amazed, and they said to each other, "What is this teaching? With authority and power, he gives orders to the evil spirits, and they come out." And the news about him spread throughout the surrounding area. Now Jesus left the synagogue and went to the home of Simon. Now Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. So he bent over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her. She got up at once and began to wait on them. When the sun was setting, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands on each one, he healed them. Moreover, demons came out of many people, shouting, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak, because they knew he was the Christ. And at daybreak, Jesus went out to a solitary place. The people were looking for him, and when they came to where he was, they tried to keep him from leaving them. But he said to them, I must preach the good news of the kingdom to the other towns also, because that is why I was sent. And he kept on preaching in the synagogues of Judea. All right, so let's start with you guys. Any questions, anything wondering in your mind, or thoughts that you have on this reading? Kind of got a couple different flows to it. There's a main theme of Jesus and authority in doing miracles. We're going to focus, like I said on Sunday, on the first part of the story of Jesus' authority over the demons.
It seems like the demons were always kind of right around. They knew who he was. It's mentioned a couple times.
Yes, which is ironic because what is the people's reaction to whenever Jesus does miracles? They're amazed. But it doesn't say any of them
Think that he's the Son of God.
know who he is or believe.
Yeah.
Whenever Jesus does miracles, that's the reaction. Amazement, befuddled. Some are confused. Some are angry. Some rejected. All right. But the crowds generally are amazed, but not believing. Right? Not believing. When Jesus calms the storm, the disciples go, "Who is this?" Right? We don't know who he is. That even even the wind and the waves obey him. Who's this guy? But the demons do know who he is. Yeah, they do.
Why do you think that that Jesus kept saying like that it wasn't time yet? That he was trying to push it off because he had other things to do.
Yeah.
But what?
So that's that's more prevalent language in John, where he keeps saying, "My time has not yet come." Luke doesn't really say that. He just rebukes the demons because they knew who he was, the Christ. And when he does heal people, he tells them not to say anything.
Yeah.
I say it's twofold. He doesn't want to be just known as the miracle worker. I don't want you to follow me and come after me just because and think I'm the Christ just because of
Those are secondary
miracle things that I
to
do.
his real mission.
Yeah, the real mission is to keep on teaching and preaching, but ultimately to get to Jerusalem. Yeah. And then the other is if there's too much attention drawn to that with the crowds, that draws the attention of the leaders. Yeah, the leaders and the Romans. Yeah, and he doesn't want that yet.
And
He knows that needs to be at Jerusalem.
it's important that it happens at Jerusalem.
And that's why he says his time is not yet come.
John's gospel.
John's gospel.
That's the language in John. Here it's just he hushes the people who have seen the miracles.
Not to talk about
Not
it.
talk about it, right? That is the language that the Matthew, Mark, and Luke use. John, Jesus will continually say, "It's not my time yet. It's not my time yet." Yeah. Until he's in Jerusalem, and it's Palm Sunday, and during that week, the Gentiles come to one of his disciples and said, "We'd like to see Jesus." That's the trigger that John says. Now Jesus says, "Okay, now the time for me to be glorified has come, and I'm going to go do the work that I was sent to do."
Well, Palm Sunday has to happen. He has to ride in on the donkey. The story is all already formed in his head.
He knows the
what
prophetic
happens.
stories. Yeah.
Yeah.
He definitely is carrying out the mission of the disciple or the descendant of Abraham in a kingly line of David, claiming to the throne, but knows that it's going to happen through being one who suffers. Yeah. Not revolution, but one who will willfully give away his life for the many.
It's one part of verse 34.
Mhm.
The Spirit is having come to destroy us. He's trying to mislead Jesus' mission. Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent."
Yeah. So Jesus rebukes
So he doesn't want that message coming out. The demons are trying to.
And what's interesting is the hush, be quiet, is the very same words that he uses when he calms the storm. So when Jesus in Mark 4 is on is on the boat and the big storm comes up and he rebukes the storm, it's the very same words in Greek. Shh, be still. Shh. Yeah. And the storm quiets, which leads me to think that that was a demonic storm. That was a Satan-induced storm, trying to wipe Jesus out and his disciples. So yeah, Jesus does have authority over even the demons. Right? What are the demons? They're fallen angels. Right? The demons are fallen angels. They're in league with Satan, and they're powerful beings, and they hate human beings. And they do not want human beings to belong
Because
to
we
God.
don't deserve
We don't deserve.
everything that,
Yeah, that's what I think.
all the slack that God gives us
Yeah.
for the way
And we're weak. Why would God love things like us?
So the demons are fallen angels?
trying to make trouble.
Torment, turn, tempt.
That's why they knew who he was.
That's why they know who he is. They're pretty powerful things too, these demons. And the doorway is open for them in different ways that people can let them have jurisdiction in your life. So it's part of our baptismal liturgy to renounce it, isn't it? Before we baptize a baby,
Yes.
the family and the church on behalf of this child says, yes, do you renounce all the devil and all of his works and all of his ways? I do renounce them. That's part of our baptismal covenant, that we renounce them.
That's kind of a big deal when we all just say, I do renounce it.
It is a big deal. You're right.
I shouldn't
Make light
speak
of
for
it.
everybody,
Yeah.
but,
It is an exorcism.
Yeah.
It's exorcism language that we use for that. And the demons are powerful. They seek to tempt and torment and turn people away from God. And they have authority to people who granted that to them. Jesus, though, has more authority than them. And so he can command them. And he comes to defeat them. And ultimately will destroy them.
So it says they have great guile, they'll use any means,
Yeah.
like, I'm your friend, and all blah, 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 different things where you wouldn't even realize it.
Well, who did Jesus call Satan one time?
Peter.
His best friend.
Paul.
No, Peter.
Peter.
His best friend Peter.
Yes.
Get behind me, Satan.
Yeah.
Because that was guile. Because Peter had the things of men in mind, not the things of God. So it's anything can turn, the satanic can use anything, right? To get you to turn away from God and to turn to your own ways. And he does use guile. He's an angel of light. He's described in Paul's letters as an angel of light, making things. And when he uses temptation, he only takes things that are good and tries to twist them into bad. One of the biggest temptations is usually around sexuality, which is God's good gift. God made it and said it's good, right? And it's the one thing that the demons know entices so many people. And if you can't see that in our culture today, then you're blind and you're not you're oblivious to everything that our culture is about right now. It's an over-sexualized culture, and Satan is behind it. Simple as that. Not that it's a bad thing, because God created it and said it's good in the context of a marriage. Yeah, in a marriage. That's where God designed it, to be good.
I mean, if you look at the inauguration last week, all the comments about the relationship between Trump and Melania, and, you know, that's none of our business. But they dwell on all of that, so that's probably kind of Satan that, like, Satan does that too.
Sure.
You know, it's not necessary.
Melania had the wrong kind of hat on.
She had the
I guess it's a big church. That's all they talk about.
So the ways that we give jurisdiction to the devil, there's a number of ways that doors are open. So one of them is dabbling with occult stuff. So that's tarot cards, spiritualists, the Ouija board, spiritualists, psychic readings. That's all open. You're opening the doorways. Astrology, Freemasonry. Freemasonry is the same. Then there's mortal sins as well. Unrepentant mortal sin. Is an
How is
open door.
Freemasonry part of that? What are they?
Freemasonry is a religion that you give jurisdiction to non-entities that are not God. You submit to the powers of the world, but not the triune God. It could be if you think you're a believer, but you're giving jurisdiction and opening the doors.
Well, when I see it in some older movies, or in some movies of olden times, and they bring it up, I don't really totally understand.
Yeah.
That was a big controversy, I think, though, in the church, because.
You cannot be a member of a Freemason
Yeah.
and be a member of a church.
Right. But
In the Lutheran Church, Missouri said, and other
we
churches
did have
as
some
well.
members that were Masons and.
When I married Roy, we were putting his things away, and he had a tube, and I said, well, what's this? And I pulled it out, and it was his apron. And the Masons, they had that white
They wear that white.
apron.
Yeah.
And
Do
I
you know
just
what to think of that?
I said, you're a Baptist son, and you have this.
A lot of
thing?"
Baptists were Masons, yeah.
Yeah, and I couldn't understand. I said, you know what, Roy? That's not good.
Yeah.
I said, we have to get rid of it.
So there's there's a podcast that we listen to. It's called The Exorcist Files. It's really well